Guys, can you hear me? I actually thought I was talking this whole time. My bad, but welcome in, guys. My bad. I literally thought I was talking the whole entire time. I pretty much, what a beautiful move out of Netflix. It was pretty much very much well to see this. I expected a little bit of a pop out of Netflix, guys. This was literally just a beautiful move. I was actually looking at the news and I thought I was talking this whole time, but I was actually reading the news at the fact that they ended up pretty much reporting about losing 970,000 members off of their sheet. They actually guided down for 2 million. So the fact that they guided down for 2 million, but they ended up losing only half. That was pretty much a very sigh of relief, and that's why we ended up having that quick pop out of Netflix. So at one point it was up about at 216 or so, I think it was. That was actually a beautiful level. I actually had a little bit of resistance around that 216, 216 half on Netflix. So I'm gonna watch to see how that pretty much responds going into tomorrow, that 216, 216 half. I would anticipate that we likely get some upgrades as a lot of analysts pretty much had their price targets on Netflix under the 200 mark. So now the fact that we pretty much got a quick pop over the 200 mark, I would look to see some analyst upgrades into the low 200s to mid 200s. Overall PT that I'm watching on Netflix is 222 half. That's particularly what I'm looking at in terms of that. Yeah, it was 200 million, and they had 970,000 that they reported, if I'm not mistaken, Alex. So they gave basically about half of what they guided down for. So that's why we saw the quick and immediate pop. But as I was mentioning, 222 half is basically what I have as my overall PT. Now, if we end up getting north of that 222 by morning, you do have another little resistance here right around that 226 mark. Otherwise, above 226, that's literally thin air up towards your gap fill, which is a very big move potentially. But it's likely going to end up, if you get an explosive move past that 226, it's likely going to be on the fact that you have some very strong analysts pretty much report that's going to come out tomorrow morning that's likely going to end up making this gap up a lot bigger than what it currently is. So that's just something that pretty much it looks beautiful right now. I want to see how they end up guiding. That's pretty much going to be the biggest thing here. You had the immediate pop. They gave half of what they guided down for in terms of losing members. But I need to see how they end up guiding to see if this is going to end up sticking. But analyst upgrades should hold this pretty much those after hours pump that we have. The fact that we also have this little bear market rally that just feels like Netflix just added fuel to the fire, and we should see even much more of a stronger impulse here in the broader market. Kind of getting in, and I'll kind of come back and see where we're sitting on Netflix here in a little bit, but kind of getting into spiral quick. Today was definitely one of those days where we had what a beautiful, strong trend day. Just to give you guys a little bit of an insight, real quick, we are still working on the clouds to pretty much come back. You want to call it Clouds 2.0. Just a little bit of an insight. We ended up having Boeing fire today. We had Meta fire today. We're hoping to pretty much get this live for you guys back soon yet again. Pretty much better and more improved in terms of risk ratio, in terms of win rate. Let's hope that we can pretty much get this back out to you guys. But we only had Meta and Boeing fire today. They both literally, won pretty much hands down. They went right to PTs as expected. So I'm hoping that ends up coming back out for you guys here very soon. That's just something I kind of want to just give you guys a little bit of an insight on. And once that ends up coming out, I will pretty much also pretty much emphasize they work so beautifully when you have such a strong trend day like we had today. So I'm hoping that pretty much comes back out for you guys. But I just want to give you a little bit of a progress on what was up with that at the moment. Getting back to spiral quick, you can pretty much see very clearly in between the green lines. That's pretty much created a nice little wedge. You can call it a pennant, but that was a hell of a breakthrough that we had today. Between pretty much showing strength in the semis overall, we had Apple's strong move. The fact that Apple ended up giving us that news yesterday, they pretty much notified that they were going to slow down hiring, cut back on expenses, and today's price action literally made Apple look like it had no news yesterday. What a snapback. It kind of felt like it had relative strength for pretty much most of the morning. I also called out Tesla pretty much on live saying key level was 731. I'll get to that chart pretty much in shortly here as well. But that was a hell of a little sneaky move that it had for a few dollars. Not relatively a strong type of day that we've seen from Tesla that we're known to seeing. But that could pick up some steam here as earnings are also pretty much approaching. So it's definitely high on the watch list, and I'll pretty much get to that. But as I look at SPY here, I'm looking to see if we get a little bit of a dip and run tomorrow. We ended up having a gap up and we ran today. Let's see if we get a gap up tomorrow on the back end of Netflix. Of course, I would expect SPY to hold up, but I would look for a buy the dip type of opportunity here come tomorrow morning. We got the dip, we got literally the gap up and ripped this morning. Let's see if we get the gap up and the dip and run tomorrow. That's what I'm gonna look for. But this rally looks like it does have more legs. The scary fact is that we have such a large gap here to pretty much literally fill at the top. That is pretty much very scary in the sense. So I'm going to look to pretty much see if we end up getting more room to this little gap fill that we have above. Let's look to see if we end up getting a nice little retrace back down towards 390 half. That's exactly where I would pretty much anticipate this little dip to give us a buying opportunity. You see that dip to 390 half, and then hopefully we can get that next leg higher in which we test gap fill here that's sitting roughly at 395.78. And overall, I was pretty much anticipating that we likely see. I don't want to say that we're going to fall short of the gap fill, but I anticipate that we likely get right around 399 low is where I would anticipate that we likely see somewhat of a rug pull, whether it be for some stupid news, kind of like you saw Apple yesterday, or it ends up being something meaningful. I would anticipate 399 low to pretty much be something where they kind of just pull the rug on us as we all expect that mental number of 400 to be smacked. So that's kind of just a mental thought process of what I'm thinking here as we approach into this gap fill. But that 390 half is basically what I'm looking at for the dip scenario in terms of buying the dip. And then we should get that rip right up towards testing gap fill. All right. So that's what I'm going to look for on SPY. As I mentioned, I was going to get into Tesla real quick. Let me see what I was looking at. I'm gonna down to a smaller time frame, kind of give you a little bit of synopsis of why I was looking at certain things today. But I did drop this little formation that we saw on Tesla. You had a nice little descending broadening wedge action. And those of you that pretty much heard on live, you've pretty much heard me and Avery talk a lot about this. This has kind of been one of my favorite types of patterns in this market. And it's actually had a lot of pretty much success pretty much in this market as well. But you had a beautiful little descending broadening wedge. You had a nice, what I would call a consolidation for Tesla. And this is why I was pretty much waiting and watching for this to make its move out of this little box today. You saw the little sideways chop. You would have expected on such a strong trend day today that Tesla would have gave you a lot more than it did. But once it ended up breaking north of that 731 level, that was the level I pretty much mentioned on live. You broke north of 731. That was just a beautiful little rip that you had into the high of the day there, 341, which is relatively about a $10 move. But about a $10 move is still relatively strong, pretty much premium that you're collecting off of that. So it was nothing big, but again, levels are pretty much what was the important part. If you start popped at 731, you had an opportunity to get roughly about a $10 move out of that. So I would expect that we likely see a little bit of a retest here off of this little downtrend resistance that we broke. Let's see if we pretty much retested here. You basically be retesting that 731 level as a support now, and then we should get our leg higher. All right. Now, if I kind of delete this and kind of get into a little bit of a larger degree on Tesla, as I mentioned, 731 now should end up acting as our support. You can basically see that we basically have a nice little wedge, if you want to say, on Tesla. If I kind of outline the larger degree move, you have a nice little wedge just sitting on Tesla here. So I would expect if we can end up getting a buy the dip opportunity at 731 tomorrow morning, then we can make a strong push up towards 746, which will basically put you right at your downtrend resistance on this little wedge here on Tesla. And then we'll see if we get a stronger push right into the earnings. All right. So that's going to be something I pay attention to. But 731 is hopefully going to be my buy the dip spot on Tesla. And then I'm going to look for to see if we have any kind of major resistance around that 746 level. Otherwise, we pop 746, I can easily see this start to run towards even like 764, in which case you likely get your strong run into Tesla earnings, and then we get the dump out of Tesla earnings. So it can pretty much work like that. I wouldn't be surprised that we get like one of those days where you get, about 40, $50 pump going into their earnings. And then again, you get the dump after the fact. So that's just something I'm kind of pretty much keeping an eye on. Obviously, the premiums being juiced, I don't pretty much condole anyone trying to force a situation to happen just because of the fact that the premiums are juiced, and especially those of you with smaller account sizes, I would hate for you to pretty much force that and it ends up backfiring. All right. So that's pretty much something I'm going to continue to watch. Other than that, I also mentioned the move also on Boeing. This was just a beautiful move on Boeing so far. If I kind of dial into, I think the 30 minutes where I pretty much drew this out, you could pretty much see a little well-defined little support and resistance that kind of make up this little megaphone action that we have. I'm watching this to pretty much make a move here continuing. I did have some resistance right around 158 half is what I was looking at, close enough to that uptrend resistance. And that's what I'm looking at here is that 158 half spot for that continuation on Boeing. But this has just been such strong relative strength, and that's just beautiful. And so I'm going to continue to see if we have continued momentum out of that, and then we'll see how that continues. All right, so that one's going to remain on my watch list. Of course, I came on here yesterday pretty much talking about the streaming giants. If I kind of get into that, the streaming giants, some of them felt like a little bit of a buy the dip opportunity. Some of them weren't. You had an opportunity to basically buy the dip on Roku. This was pretty much a beautiful one here. If you ended up picking up the dip, it was just still beautiful to pretty much get, I think, about a $3 to $4 move to the upside as it went green. But I still actually have this also on watch. Let's see, as you see it pretty much popped here after hours. We actually see that we're pretty much peaking over this downtrend resistance finally. I was looking for it to happen today during market hours. It just did not typically happen. So we now got it basically after hours. I do have continuation, a little bit of resistance sitting right around this 196 half is what I'm looking at for. I don't know why I said 196. It's 96 half is what I'm looking at for some pretty much intermediate resistance. That's basically been where you've teetered north or south of this. So 96 half is where I'm looking at in terms of upside. Let's see if we get a little bit more of a continuation. Above that 96 half, I do have a pretty much a hard resistance. Right around 100.67 is what I'm looking at for a hard resistance on that. So that 100 level is likely going to end up being pretty key for this one. All right. And then, of course, the other name, Disney. Disney's had a strong impulse so far. That's going to be another one. Keep an eye on. You see it's up, what, almost 2% after hours. But it actually broke right through my resistance I was watching here. Right around this 100.06 is what I was watching for resistance. Now, the bigger thing is that on this little gap up we have after hours, can we get a stronger continuation into this gap fill and complete it? That's what I'm going to look at. You do have a gap here sitting over 102.12. Let's see if we get that continuation, and that would be a beautiful gap to complete here, right around 103.25. So it's already been what seems like a strong impulse out of this little falling wedge action. I'll see if this continuation, a buy the dip spot pretty much would be right around this resistance at that 100.06. That will be potentially the buy the dip spot if we can pretty much test that as support, and you get the beautiful rip that I pretty much anticipate. All right. Kind of catching up, a little bit of everything. Amazon's final, please. Price target on Amazon. All right, let's take a peep at Amazon for you. I think I mentioned earlier on. I think I was watching 116 to pretty much be some heavy resistance. I don't know why exactly I ended up drawing this for what reason, but I am gonna delete it. I probably drew that for some reason. You pretty much basically have a nice little wedge. You are approaching this little downtrend resistance on this pretty much. I had resistance basically sitting right here where you pretty much closed into the end of the day here before you have this little after hours pump. But right around this 118 mark is where I had resistance pretty much. That's what I was looking at. You broke north of that resistance. So now you're basically looking at coming into the downtrend resistance. You're sitting right around 119 half as you're basically, what I want to say, what, a quarter? I want to say, what, 40 cents away after hours here from hitting that downtrend resistance. So 119 half is likely going to end up getting smacked. Now, where do I particularly see your supply level kind of at this moment right now? I would anticipate that you likely see your resistance right around here in terms of your supply. This is where I would expect. So I still have quite a bit of legs on this once it ends up breaking that 119 half. If you can break that 119 half, I can see this pretty much pushing up north towards 123, 123 half. But I need to see this end up breaking north of that 119 half and pretty much getting a nice base before you can get that additional $4 move to the upside before the earnings come up. All right. So you break pretty much look to see if you hold 119 half tomorrow morning. And that's what you're going to want to see if that can end up building a base. Because I've seen where the market's dipped and Amazon's actually held a pretty strong base in terms of showing relative strength. All right. So I would see that. But again, 123 half is roughly where I see supply going into their earnings. And it may end up being more explosive than that, but that's where I see the intermediate supply right now in terms of your next meaningful dip opportunity. All right. So I do like Amazon though a lot. That's actually going to be another name that I look at tomorrow. It was when I was looking at today. I kind of went on Twitter. I think I did not expect this kind of strong trend there, of course, but I mentioned that 116 was my overhead resistance this morning. If it could not break north of 116, I kind of expected a little bit of a quick dump earlier on this morning. But the fact that she ended up breaking 116, if you saw that this morning, you saw my tweet over that 116, you can already see that you had a quick little $2 move to the upside here. So that was a beautiful one. I'll continue to watch it, like I said, and we'll see how she does tomorrow. All right. Other than that, let's see pretty much how the tech sector continues to respond. The semis have been literally astonishing right now. AMD has actually surprised me. It broke north of my resistance level as well. I had a little bit of a ascending broadening wedge on AMD. I was expecting it to pretty much hit supply right here at this 85 to 85 half. That was not the case. We even broke north of that. So that's very surprising to see it break north of an ascending broadening wedge. I haven't seen that typically too much, but that's just something that shows you how strong this relative strength is in this market at the moment. Now, resistance that I'm pretty much watching here on AMD pretty much lies right around this 86.70 would be where I have resistance on AMD. Let's see if she can pop over that 86.70 spot as she's roughly a few cents away from it after hours. But you do have this gap fill that still is incomplete at this moment. And that's going to be what's on watch for me tomorrow. So if we can pop over that 86.70 tomorrow, that's a beautiful gap fill that still needs to be completed up towards 89.01. So I'm gonna continue to watch that one on tomorrow. But over 86.70, that's roughly what is that? 86.70 to 89.01. You're looking at about a near, I want to say just over a $2 move on that. So that's gonna be a beautiful one in terms of AMD if semis can continue to show some meaningful strength tomorrow. All right. But other than that, I don't think there's anything that's kind of on the watch list particularly. You saw the relative strength in certain names here. Netflix are ahead of their earnings. I mentioned to pretty much keep that on watch. You had a nice move actually going into the earnings, about a $10 move, pretty much going into the earnings. And I mentioned it on live that it was basically a beautiful dip buy opportunity. As I mentioned, I was basically going to come back to this chart. You had a dip buy opportunity. And the reason why it was pretty much meaningful here is that if you actually noticed, you had the beautiful downtrend break off of the gap up. You saw it kind of go red this morning, but the body of this little 4 hour candle ended up holding above the downtrend resistance. So that was the most meaningful part. Once you saw us reclaim over that 192 half spot, that's where you start to see this literally just take off and you saw a strong rip right into the end of the day here. So hopefully you guys kind of heard me talk about this one on live. I also pretty much, I believe I dropped a chart on it on my Twitter as well. But that held beautifully on that downtrend resistance. And as you see, that's what I was actually looking for after hours as I was coming back to it. We snapped right over that 216 half resistance that I was watching for. And this will likely end up trading up towards 222 and then 226 as I pretty much have as my two resistance spots. So let's keep an eye on it tomorrow. If anything changes by morning, I'll likely have some updated levels on live tomorrow. But those are the two key levels that I can pretty much look at right now that stand out is the 222 and 226 is two meaningful levels that I'm watching right now. All right. Renee, INTC. I know that Tom was pretty big on that one this morning. I believe he made some pretty strong bank on that as well. You had literally, this thing literally looks like it's been straight up. You had a beautiful inverted head and shoulders, nice little left shoulder. You had your bottom, which created your head and a right shoulder. But the funny part about this one, and this is where it's a little bit more of a tricky thing, is that when you have such strong moves in the broader market, you don't typically always get a retest once you get a breakout. Because as you see, this did not get really much of a retest on the breakout of this inverted head and shoulders. It literally just looks like a straight up impulse here on the off of the 4 hour. Now, if I'm going to say I do expect semi pretty much the strength in semis to continue. I expect that to pretty much continue. So what I'm looking for is basically to continue into this gap fill. Pretty much is what I'm pretty much anticipating. Now, where's going to be that meaningful next buy the dip type of opportunity? I would anticipate it's going to be right around this level. So I expect a little bit more of some meaningful upside here on this one. You likely get right around that 41 half to 41. I want to say roughly 41.43 is what I'm looking at for resistance right now. Once you smack that 41.43 spot, that's where I would expect your meaningful buy the dip opportunity. And what I'm going to look for is to pretty much anchor off of what was a meaningful reversal spot previously. As you see, you had a strong reversal dating back to the third week of May here at this, what was this, 40.31. That's where I would expect to get the dip opportunity, and you could take this to that next leg higher. All right. 1 second, guys. All right. So again, that's going to be a beautiful one. I do expect stronger movement on this one. We already seen what the semis have done. Do I expect a little bit of a breather coming ahead? I would say so. But this movement in the overall broader market has been so strong that there's nothing telling me that right now that we're gonna get a dip necessarily tomorrow. But I expect a little bit of a quote unquote buy the dip opportunity earlier on in the morning is what I would say. We do need a breather. I think it's much needed for this to continue, but we're literally in just a movement where you've seen these strong impulses in the bear market. This is not the first bear market rally we've had, quote unquote, and this is why everything just feels like everything's flying. The biggest thing I can tell you right now, and this is where it's more of a psychological level, is don't try to fight the trend, especially if you're doing it intraday. Like today, today was definitely one of those days where you did not want to fight that intraday trend because you saw how strong it was. You did not see any relative strength in any pretty much circumstances of looking at the semis, looking at your quote unquote Fang names, which is not really Fang, it's kind of like Mang now, right? You didn't see any relative weakness in any of those names. Yeah, you could have probably pointed to Tesla earlier on, but it still held green. It's still pretty much consolidated for the most part. So one of the biggest things I will say is don't try to fight the trend too much. Tomorrow, yeah, you might get a little bit of a pressure of selling pressure earlier on in the morning for that little buy the dip opportunity. But I caution pretty much about trying to fight the trend. Let's wait to pretty much see a more meaningful reversal to the downside rather than trying to force a situation as you just saw literally a melt up all day today. All right. So that's pretty much my message here today. Hopefully no one kind of lost money trying to get a trend change today, forcing that situation to happen. But other than that, I hope everyone had a great day. Today was literally just buy anything and let it just watch it rip kind of day. So hopefully you guys had a solid day. I would hope let's see tomorrow what tomorrow brings, and we have another beautiful day tomorrow. But this time we're pretty much prepared to literally get a buy the dip opportunity, and whether we end up seeing that rip tomorrow or we see it seeing the next day off of basically what's going to be with Tesla's earnings, let's pretty much wait for it. But hopefully it is a buy the dip opportunity for this next movement. All right. Other than that, I will pretty much conclude there, guys. Appreciate all of you joining.